Wonderful is my Redeemer, wonderful is He, saving me from sin and sorrow, washed at Calvary. Wonderful, the Prince of Glory, mighty God is He. Wonderful is my Redeemer, wonderful to me. Wonderful, wonderful.
I believe we said there are 271 verses in the book of Ecclesiastes, and we are slowly making our way through the book. If you keep all the notes, you will have you a nice little commentary on the book of Ecclesiastes. Okay, so that's reading. I punch holes in those things. You can file those away. They burn pretty good, I'm told. But we're glad you're here this morning. We're in Ecclesiastes, the second chapter, and we are going to begin at verse 10 this morning. Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 10. Here's what Solomon writes. And whatsoever mine eyes desired, I kept not from them. I withheld not my heart from any joy. For my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was the portion of all my labor. Wow. There's a lot in that particular text. Solomon is involved in a big spiritual blank. What's the fill in the blank there? Experiment. Yes, he is involved in a huge spiritual experiment. And he's trying to find what? Happiness, purpose, meaning to life, isn't he? And does Solomon have the ability to do this? What two things give him the ability to carry out this experiment? Number one, he's rich. He's got all the wealth, all the resources he can possibly obtain. Secondly, what? Well, he has authority. Okay, he has authority to do these things. If he needs something done, he can command that it be done. Some of us don't have either of those luxuries, do we? Okay, but Solomon had the ability to do that. We're going to get into a statement that he makes in just a minute about that very concept. So he's carrying out this experiment. He's looked at wisdom, he's looked at pleasure, and he's looked at labor, hasn't he? In his attempt to find happiness. Do individuals look into all those different areas today trying to find meaning for life? Yeah, trying to be happy. If I can just work enough, if I can just have enough pleasure, if I could just be wise enough, boy, everything will be wonderful. That's what Solomon is engaged in. And notice the very opening part of this verse. He says that he used two things to search out this wisdom and all. He says he used his eyes and he used his heart. And whatsoever mine eyes desired, I kept not from them. Kathleen does a great job shopping through the year till Christmas. Okay? And we get to Christmas time and you start buying gifts, right? And so you buy for this grandchild, and you buy for that grandchild, and you buy for this grandchild, and you run into this little special, and you run into that little special, and you have a coupon in your pocket, and you have discounts at the store, and you have people talking to you. I can get you a little bit more off on that if you want to. And all of a sudden, all that our eyes desire. Last night she said, we just got to quit this spending. But wouldn't it be nice that if just whatever you desired, whatever you saw, you could just what? You just buy it. You know, one of the things I would love to have for about a year is a beautiful, nice home right on the beach. I mean, looking out over the beach. And I'd love to be able to just open up some sliding glass doors and just listen to the waves, you know. And I'll never have that. But wouldn't it, you know, if I saw one I liked, oh yeah, just give me that one. Give me two of those, okay? Whatever. And that's the way Solomon was. If his eyes desired something, guess what? He didn't keep it from him. Notice the second thing that he says. He says, I withheld not my heart from what? Any joy. He may not have seen it. He may just have thought about it. And guess what he said? Yep, I'll take two. And he could have anything that he wanted. Don't we all have that kind of that longing to have that ability? sometimes. You know, life gets tough. We can't have the things that we want. And we see things that we want. We have longings for things that we want, and we'll never have them. And yet, we wish we could sometime. And so I think every human being at points in their lives goes through this process that Solomon has right here, except we just can't fulfill what he was able to do. But now, after he says that, he makes a very interesting statement. And this is the first time in this book that he's ever said this. Okay? I want you to listen to what he says. For my heart rejoiced in all my what? In all my labor. And this was my portion of all my labor. Notice that. My heart rejoiced in all my labor. True or false? Well, I mean, hey, you know, he's working pretty hard, you know. You have about 50 or 60 people you got to come in contact with every day, talking to them and tell them what to do, meeting after meeting. He's probably beat to a frazzle. But is there some joy that comes from our labors? I see if, you know, some people don't want to say it. You know, I had one say it, and then I had a couple people do this. You know, you're scared if you say it, you'll be wrong, right? But it is, you know, when we work, when we labor, when we toil, there's some joy to our labors. And Solomon says that he rejoiced in all my labor. There was some sense of satisfaction that was brought to him by what he's done. I wrote down several things. First, the satisfaction of a job well done. Number 2, momentary pleasure of success. How about this one? The fulfillment of one's plans. If you have some plans and you say, hey, I'm going to do this by this date, and you get it all done and it's behind you, you feel pretty good about that, don't you? How about the next one? The pleasure of some boasting. Is that kind of fun sometime? You know? People come over to our house and we've redone our whole house, right? And they're just standing on our front porch. Why don't you just come on in here and see what we've done? You know? And you take them for about a 2-hour tour in a 900 square foot home. Okay? And see, there's a little what? There's a little boasting in that. There's pleasure in that job that's well done. Another one, the enjoyment of what was built. You know, even though we may not use it very long, even though it may not hold the pleasure that we thought it had, when we first get it done, there is some pleasure in it, isn't there? You build a swimming pool, and guess what? Man, that first summer, you're all in it, right? And by the end of the first summer and first winter, you're going, oh, why did we put this thing in? I'm just kidding. How about the accolades of others? Does that bring you some pleasure? You know? Well, you ought to see that. You ought to see that condo Vic's got down there on the beach, man. You know, and you hear somebody say that to somebody, oh yeah, you know, send them on down. So there is some pleasure in our labors. Notice the lessons. Folks, it's the pleasure of those things that causes people to engage in them, isn't there? When a man gets a lot of wisdom and he gets very, very smart, there's pleasure in that, isn't there? He becomes the guru. He becomes the go-to guy. He becomes the guy who gets invited to all the talk shows. He's the one who is the expert in his field. So that makes him feel pretty good. He gets to stand up before the microphones and he gets to pop off to everybody of how wonderful he is and how much he knows about things. And so it's that pleasure that drives us in. You know, individuals have a fun weekend, right? They go out with their friends, they get out on the lake, they get a little tipsy, a little drunk. They almost drown, but they forget about that. But when the weekend's finally over and they get to work on Monday, what do they say? Wow, man, I had a blast this weekend, right? It was the what that drew them in. It's the pleasure that brings them in. Somebody builds a huge factory. Somebody builds a huge apartment building. Somebody builds a beautiful hotel, and guess what? There's some pleasure in that, isn't there? You get to see that, and it brings you the satisfaction. And so it's that pleasure of all the things that are in the world that just drives individuals to try to find happiness in those things, and we have to be aware of that. Does the Bible talk about even pleasure in sin? Oh yes, Hebrews 11, there's pleasure in sin for how long? For a season. And he doesn't say how long that season is. Sometimes it can be a short season. Sometimes it can be a relatively long season, can it not? And so, but there is some pleasure in things. But notice point number B. Not all the pleasure found in these things are evil. Is it wrong to work? No, in fact, the Bible commands work. It's interesting to me that when God put Adam and Eve in the garden, why did He put them there? Does anybody know? The Bible says to dress it and to keep it. You think there was a little bit of work and labor in what they had to do? Sure. They had to dress it and keep it. You know, things are going to grow. They're going to have to be pruned. They're going to have to, certain things are have to be done. Some things are going to have to be watered a little bit. Whatever it is, there's some work that's going to be involved in. So He immediately puts man and woman in the garden and gives them work to be done. What happened after the fall, though? There was still work, but their work involved what now? Sweat and pain, right? It was going to be a whole different world. Now the ground was cursed, and now it was going to be much more difficult to do what needed to be done. Now there's thorns and now there's thistles, are there not, in the world? And things are just going to be a lot more difficult after the curse. It wasn't that they didn't work before. It was just things that were more difficult after the curse. So, just because if you go out on a weekend and you have some fun, as long as it's moral, as long as it's clean, there's nothing wrong with having some pleasure like that. All of us are about to have our Christmases, aren't we? We're going to have our family over. We're going to get together with family and friends, and we have fun. We have fun Friday night. There's nothing wrong with some pleasure in life, and some things that we do are okay. Nothing wrong with that. But notice point C, the vanity of labor and pleasure is that they can only last as long as life lasts. Isn't that true? It's as long as they last. Notice also, too, they often become the very thing that bring troubles and difficulties to our life, aren't they? You know, the things that we wanted, the things that we longed for. I long for that house on the beach, right? And then it starts to rust. And things start to go bad, and I get repairmen out there. Well, that's going to be a $10,000 repair. Are you kidding me? I can't even pay the note now. Okay? And then a hurricane comes, yes. Speaking from somebody who has been on the beach a while. And notice this next statement. So just make mention, I just want you to realize Solomon said there is some joy and there is some satisfaction even in our labors. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. And notice what he says, and this was my portion of all my labor. This is the first time in the book of Ecclesiastes that we read the word portion, but it will not be the last. Notice that he's going to make mention of this word 8 times in the text of this book. So it tells me the word is important. Solomon defines that word portion as allotment. Okay, Strong does. Brown, Driver, and Briggs says it means portion, share, part, territory. Notice this next section, one's possession. When God put us into this world, guess what He gives us? My portion. That's what He gives me. My portion. Now for Solomon, his portion was what? His portion was great. And he makes mention of that, doesn't he? He even brags about it. I was great, he says. Now, we all don't get the same portion. Okay? We all don't get the same portion, but all of us will have a portion in life. No one's portion will be exactly the same as another man's portion. Each of us should be content with what? Our portion in life. Now, if you want to work and labor and try to increase your portion, there's nothing wrong with that, is there? And it may be that you're blessed and you inherit a big portion that somebody else doesn't get. You want to know what individuals want today? They want us to all have the same what? Same portion. Now, in order to do that, you have to take somebody else's portion and give it to somebody else. You know what? I wrote an article on one occasion, and it was a fake article, but I was talking about my grandson. I said, my grandson went to school today, and my grandson is an AB student. And he said that he came home and he told his mom, Mom, the teacher's doing something crazy. She says she's given everybody in the class a C, which is average, right? And so his grades went from AB now to what? All C's. And I said, why'd she do that? Well, she wants everybody to be what? Everybody to be the same. We have some individuals down here on the C, D, and F list, right? Well, in order to pull them up to C's, what do you have to do to the ABs? You got to take them down. So they pull from the ABs, give it to the D's and F's, and make everybody what? Everybody C's. Now let me tell you something. That happened to my kid, I'd be one mad dude. Wouldn't you? That kid has worked, he has labored, he has toiled, he's studied, he's done well on tests, he's probably sacrificed some things to make those kind of grades, and now all of a sudden, you just got to give it up. Big time. Notice point D. None of us should be covetous of another man's portion. That leads to jealousy. Elon Musk, wealthiest man in the world. I am not jealous of that man at all. I'm not envious of that man at all. I'm glad he's been able to do what he's been able to do. I wish I knew a little bit more about Tesla, and I wish I knew a little bit more about space, because I might be right up there with him. You know it? I got no problems with that. If I want to be rich, guess what I need to do? I need to find me some place where I can excel, don't I? And where I can accumulate that kind of wealth for myself. But I don't need to be jealous of others. We all have our what? We all have our portion. Folks, has there ever been a time in the entirety of the world that everybody had the exact same portion? Never. And it will never happen. Never. If there had been anybody on the face of the earth who could complain about their portion, guess who it was? Jesus. The foxes have holes, the birds have nests, but the Son of Man hath not where to lay his head. But he didn't complain about it. He didn't gripe about it. He didn't try to steal other people's stuff so he could have what they had. He was content with his lot, wasn't he? And we have to be content with our portion in life. Either of those two desires, jealousy and envy, leads to something that is beneficial for the individual, folks. They're both sinful, and they will harm the heart of an individual. And then I looked on all the works that my hands had, and on all the labor I had labored to do. Now remember, he just said, I what? I rejoiced in my labor. And now he steps back and he looks at it all again. And behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit. And there was no profit under the sun. Man. To build great things, there are massive costs, extreme amounts of time, intense labor, paying attention to details, and overcoming obstacles. Isn't that true of everything in life? If you're really going to be successful, you've got to do those things. You've got to invest yourself. You've got to sacrifice. You've got to pour in time, talent, money, and all kinds of things in order to have, don't you? And notice, surely that can't be in vain. And yet Solomon says what? When I really step back and look at it, it's all vanity and all the works that great palaces are often left in shambles by destroying armies. Is that willing to hold back any cost. Homes and buildings have been left to children only to have those buildings auctioned off. Isn't that true? Happened to my grandparents. My grandparents left their house. They said, we're going to put it on the auction block. My uncle said, no, we're not. We're going to sell it to the man across the street. And it didn't even matter if one of my cousins wanted the house. Just give it to the neighbor across the street because they wanted it. Gone. No longer in the family anymore. Gone. Sometimes homes and lands are left behind and the building collapse and crumble with no one laying claim to them. Have you ever seen any of those on the road? I drive by those all the time and I look at buildings, I look at houses, I look at barns, I look at all kinds of stuff and I say, that ought to be useful for something. It's just sitting there and it's decaying, it's decrepit, it's falling down, the roof is crumbling in. And most of the time, it's somebody has died, they left it to their family really didn't want it, and guess what they do? They just leave it behind, don't they? I've given you a couple of pictures there that you can look at, some dilapidated buildings. I bet you that house on the left was a pretty prominent house at one time, don't you? Can you imagine that thing all fixed up and decorated? Unreal. Look at that other house, the inside. Looks like it would have been nice at some point in time, and now it's just left to total decay. Happens all the time. Beverly? Mm-hmm. A lot of times nowadays it is. Right. Absolutely. Yep. Hurts, doesn't it? Well, that's home. Absolutely. It does hurt. And it's, my brother, he was on a golf course once, and I forget what hole it was, but right at the end of this hole was a lot, and it had a for sale sign on it. And he saw it there month after month after month. And finally he called the guy. The guy lived out in Arizona, and he says, yeah, I inherited that lot. And he says, I will never use it. He said, you can have it for $1. $1. My son, my brother said, I can't give you just $1. He said, let me send you at least 100. So he wrote him a check for $100, and that man sent him the title. He sold it later for $7,000. Isn't that crazy? But people just leave this stuff. Okay, all this stuff. All this stuff really means what? Nothing. Everything we put so much credence in and we think we rely on and need it so badly, it means nothing. The rewards of one's labors do not follow the individual to the grave. All of it is what? Left behind. Every bit of it. Clark makes an interesting statement. Because it promised the good I wished for, but it could not perform the promise, and left my soul discontented and chagrined. Man. Many times the things that we think we need so badly really don't provide the benefit that they think they will to our lives. Jeannie? Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. This ought to be the one that we listen to. He had it all. If we talked about Elon Musk a while ago, if you look at Elon Musk and you put Solomon right beside him, Elon Musk pales in comparison. to Solomon. Did you know that? It's crazy. And so here's the man. He is the guru, isn't he? He is the specialist in all of this. And guess what he tells us? It's vanity, folks. It's empty. It's useless. And yet we fail to listen. Notice Ecclesiastes 2:12, an interesting statement. And I turn myself to behold wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man doeth that cometh after the king? Even that which hath been already done. Right here's the point that I was going to make a while ago, or talked about. Solomon reflects upon the fact that he had gained wisdom. He had experimented with madness and folly. And guess what? He says this, for what can he do that cometh after the king? Man. Who is it that can do more than I've done? Not a soul, folks. Not a soul. No one could experiment more than Solomon. No one else has the resources to do what Solomon did. Others might foolishly believe that they could attempt to do more than Solomon, but guess what? They cannot. Notice that last point. Even if another could match the extent of the experimentation done by Solomon, he knew that he too would eventually reach the exact same conclusion. It's all what? Vanity and vexation of spirit. The scale of experiment that Solomon did has never been attempted by anyone else. The book of Ecclesiastes stands alone among the books of wisdom in the world. It's the only experiment ever conducted to this scale ever in the course of the world. Like Jeannie was saying, here's the man who did it. Here's his conclusion. We need to learn from him, don't we? Wow. Now listen to this next point. This is good. And then I saw that wisdom excelleth folly, as far as light excelleth darkness. Throughout the course of Ecclesiastes, Solomon sprinkles some little tidbits of things that he's learned. One of the things that we just mentioned, labor does have some joy to it. Okay? So there is some joy to labor. Solomon's not trying to discount all labor. That's not what he's saying. He's not saying, just create a bunch of people who just sit on a bench and never work. That's not what he's saying. And so now he's experimented with these three things, right? Labor, wisdom, and pleasure. And he says that wisdom, what? Excels folly. Are you going to go out and just have a blast on the weekend and spend hundreds and thousands of dollars? Or are you going to sit at home and get you a few good books and increase your wisdom? He says, what you do in acquiring wisdom is of much more benefit than what? Than pleasure. See, Solomon learned that there's a distinction between, even though I've been looking for happiness in all of these things, some of them are better to apply to your life than other things are. And he says wisdom excels folly. Are there benefits to wisdom when it comes to man? Oh yeah, I wrote down several there, didn't I? 6 of them, I believe. Advances in technology. You want to know why we have a cell phone? Advances in technology. Smart people in the world. You know that? It's crazy, but it's true. Advances in science. Aren't you glad we have some advances in science? Very seldom do you go in for heart surgery today and they saw your sternum open. That's nasty. Can you imagine that? Just saw that sternum open. Pull that thing apart and work on that heart. They don't even have to do that anymore. They can go in through your wrist now to do a stent. It's the craziest thing I've ever heard. They go through your neck to do back surgery. They don't have to flip you over anymore. How do you do that? I don't know. Advances in what? Science and technology. Advances in medicine. Aren't you glad for that? I am. I don't like being sick. I'm a baby. This kid start feeling bad, he's going to find something, get him feeling gooder. I do not want to be down for 4, 5, 6 weeks. Okay, you can be sick, you can brag about being sick and how tough you are. I'm a baby. Okay, Advances in mental health. Go back and study the mental health industry, folks. You want to know when we really started paying any attention to mental health? Late 1800s. And we thought it was tied to the moon at the time. We still do, some people do. Oh, it's full moon! Okay? Lunatic. Hey, I'm not kidding. That word lunatic comes from lunar, the moon. When the moon reaches certain stages, people get crazy. And they become what? Lunatics. That's true. Okay? Advances in relationships, advances in agriculture. We can feed people off an acre of land that used to take hundreds of acres. Did you know that? It's crazy. See, just wisdom in and of itself is not necessarily sinful. Okay? There's some good in it. And Solomon says wisdom is a lot better than what? A lot better than folly. A lot better than pleasure. In fact, he expresses how much it excels the other things. He says, as far as what? Light excels darkness is how much gooder wisdom is than folly. Light is as different from darkness as one can get, folks. Wisdom excels pleasure and labor to that extent. Solomon's trying to get us to understand just some basic things about life, isn't he? And it's amazing how he sprinkles these things throughout this book. Read the next few verses and we'll pick up there next week. Thank you very much.